Welcome to part one of my conversation with Karl Calder, who today is the president of Calder Allied Consulting. But for 32 years, he spent as an agent in the Drug Enforcement Administration of the federal government, the DEA, where he left as special agent in charge of the Washington Division. He was the leader of over 500 special agents, task force officers, intelligence analysts that covered Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and West Virginia. In this conversation, we didn't even get a chance to do an introduction. Karl was just started sharing his wisdom and his insights on racism, on leadership, on the drug problem in America, on police brutality. We weaved in and out of these topics, and I was just in awe of his insights and his wisdom that he brought to the conversation. So please enjoy part one of our conversation. Part two will be next week.
22 to 23 veterans a day committing suicide. You now have PTSD, and that's a factor. But now you tack on substance use. So now you have two issues: substance use, PTSD. Then you have what is now called the Mission Act. And the Mission Act gives our veterans the preference to go outside of the VA system into private health care to seek treatment. Well, the VA system and the private systems don't communicate. And there's a chance that the doctor in the private sector and in the private space and the doctor at the VA have no communication. And it's really up to the patient to notify and make the physicians aware of, one, what medications they're taking, and the doctors would then know if there's a conflict. So when you have a conflict in medication, you now have a time bomb. And so that could lead to a stressor and anxiety and PTSD and medication. And now you have a huge problem. Now you tack that on to the general public. Okay. Right now, COVID-19 has interrupted the recovery process for those who are suffering from substance use disorder. And it's doing it in a number of ways. One, the fact that you have a chance to relapse because, one, there's a chance that there may be a job loss. Okay, there may be isolation issues, which plays a factor in recovery, whether it's short term or long term. And the last thing, the medications used in recovery, Suboxone, ibuprofen, and methadone, well, they're not really monitored because of this COVID situation. You give it, send them home and hope that it works. Give them an extra dose and let's see if it works. And so you now have three issues here: law enforcement, public, and our veterans. And so that's where we really have to really, let's not forget about substance use disorder, because now that's climbing as we go through this COVID period.
It's incredible. Yeah, I'm 30 years clean and sober. I ended up living in my truck when I came to DC. I was 130 pound living in my truck, and getting clean and sober, was just the first step of rebuilding some semblance of a life at 28 years old.
Right.
But I had a community around me. My brother was
Hmm.
sober. He put me right in the middle of a community, and it was really, I had every, if I was going to win that battle, I had every advantage. And everything that you're talking about, there's just so much working against
Right.
the recovery process. So the
Yeah.
earnestness may not be enough.
Right. So that support base that you were used to throughout your week is cut down to maybe one or two people, where you had a whole group of people that you associated with, and they actually helped you through that process every day. And now all of a sudden that's gone. Let's say you get laid off. All these things that happen to somebody in recovery, and that's what we really have to continue focusing on. How do we get these services to people who need them, and those who have substance use disorders? They need that support,
Can
or
we back up?
any disorder.
Totally. Can we back up just a little bit
Uh-huh.
to talk about the different hats that you wear now?
Yeah.
Because you own a consulting company which helps with
Right.
government contracting and things like that, but you also consult in security and substance abuse, and then you have nonprofits that you work with, and just in every facet of life, you seem to have your hand in it. Talk about the different places where you're actually trying to make a difference.
Well, one of the things, when you're in law enforcement, and it's a little more, and federal law enforcement, it's a little more rigid. So when what I mean by that is, hey, you have to comply with the agency rules and regulations. Everything. You can't talk to certain people, whether it be the press, or you can't express yourself in a way that you really would want to or like to, because you're in the government. You can't share your religious beliefs. There are a number of things that you can and can't do. And so what I decided I would do in retirement is kind of release myself from some of those confinements, so to speak. And not to say I would go off base and get radical with it, but the thing is, there's things that I can now venture out and do, and really learn more, and make myself a little more attuned to what's going on in the world. And so I decided I would start my own business. And the first thing I did was I talked to people about what I wanted to do. And one of the contracts that I have, the head guy says, "Well, Karl, do you really want to just leave and start working now?" I said, "Not really. I started my own business." And he says, "Well, we'll try to get you a contract here, and you could help us out in our government portfolio, law enforcement portfolio." And then, and that was the Thomson Reuters company. And I happened to be in church one Sunday, and one of my fellow parishioners reaches out. He says, "Well, what are you going to do with your security clearance?" I said, "Well, nothing. I'm not using it." "So you ever think about parking it somewhere?" And so that's when he introduced me to the MITRE Corporation. And so they were able to um, um, I was able to get a subcontract through the MITRE Corporation, and they parked and actually bought over my security clearance from DOJ to the DOD space. So I now help both of those companies navigate their government portfolios. And in particular, with the Drug Enforcement Administration, there's different offerings from each company, and MITRE is a federally funded uh, research center, and so they actually support the government, and Thomson Reuters is more so business oriented in terms of their offerings. So I decided I would do those two things. Then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna take the opportunity to really see what the heck went on with this opioid problem and these manufacturers and distributors. And so I actually took a little. It's a little risk here, but I decided that I would do some subject matter expert
Consulting.
Excuse me. Thank you. And so one of the companies that I consult, and the law firm is a smaller company, but in my eye, it wasn't one of the bigs. Okay, and what we have now is the national opioid litigation. And so what I decided to do was really get an understanding of what the real problem is. And okay, is it the manufacturer? Is it the distributor? Is it the pharmacy? Is it the doctor? Okay, is it the patient? And so now I get a broader perspective of, you know what, there's a fine line in responsibility with everybody. And so to the point, but some have more of a responsibility in this problem than others. And we need to recognize that, and not paint a broad brush on everything. There's good doctors. Okay. And there's some doctors that are falling off at the wayside and been a big part of this problem. And then there's the pharmacies, how they were actually trained, how the prescription drug monitoring systems work, and how that plays an important role in identifying good actors and bad actors, and conflicts in medication. And then you go into the distributor. Okay, the distributor distributes. What's the communication between law enforcement, the DEA, and distributor, and the communication between pharmacy, big time pharmacies, the retail pharmacies and the mom and pop pharmacies, as to why they're being distributed so much in certain places. Okay. And then you have the big time manufacturers that are really a part in this, because they actually manufacture, and they manufacture to the distributor, and this distributor downstream. Okay. So really having the opportunity to have seen it from both sides of the spectrum, from every side,
Right.
And one of my areas of responsibility in the DEA was West Virginia, the district, and Maryland. So I actually ran the epicenter of this opioid crisis. West Virginia had the highest overdose death rate per
Mm.
capita in the country. And so just understanding those things, and then branching out into a really unknown space, into this world of CBD and hemp. Well, you know what? I'm saying now, if we're going to uh, legalize this, and it may have some value, let's do the research on it. Let's so I became an advisor for a company in Kentucky, and they were doing research with the CBD with the University of Kentucky, and that's actually Gincana. And so I began to learn more about that process in the production of the CBD, but I began to learn where the gaps were
Where
in
people were taking
safety,
shortcuts.
safety and security, not Gincana, because actually they were pretty good and reputable company. Okay, and they actually, the production of the CBD from the hemp was actually done. It was second to none.
Mm.
Okay, and still is. But what actually happens is, what happens to this when it leaves Gincana and it gets down to the distributor? And then the distributor has to deal with this and sell it to the retailer. And so that's where we're seeing the problem, because there's no control at that level, and there's no security placed on
So what you're saying is
from
the integrity of the product is being
right
compromised somewhere in that food chain.
in that food chain, not at the point of manufacture or production, but
Wow.
down the line. And that's where all the investigative reports end up. You know, they start right there and they end there. Nobody's ever gone into the production phase of this to understand the production.
Mm.
And so I also work with a company that places protection on the products. Okay, so that is a way to of safety for the product. We just now have to find out if it says or does what it says it can do.
Right.
Okay, and that's where the hang up and the drawback is. Oh, can this do what it says it can do? All right, and you can't advertise it to say it does something if it hasn't been proven.
Right.
All right, but there are a number of people and doctors who are now prescribing this. If we go back to the veterans have or the VA has drug codes, okay, and different codes for treatment. Well, in the VA space, Tai Chi, yoga, all right, are used for pain, okay, and acupuncture, and some different oils and different supplements. Well, when you get into the private space, you got to
Now
pay for
that's
all these.
fascinating. The VA is picking up on some of these more holistic
Right,
methodologies, but the private sector is still pushing the drugs.
right. So when you know, that's the good thing, and I think just being able to understand that, getting out of the rigid space, taking a deep dive into these other spaces, and then finally doing some things that, help the community, Mentor Foundation, helping that organization grow.
So mentor organization is where you work with teens to go be a positive influence in their communities.
Right. Yes. And this is funny. I just accepted a role at the academies of Loudon. I'm going into teaching.
Oh, wow.
Seniors who are accepted into the academies of Loudoun County, and I'm going to be teaching administration of justice.
Oh, wow.
And these are the some of the brightest in Loudoun County, and they're actually all seniors, and they also can get some college credit for the courses that they take at the academy.
Oh, what a very cool! I'm a new resident of Loudoun County, so that's a very cool thing to hear.
Yeah, right.
So let me just take pieces of what you just said. So you started talking about the DEA.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you go into law enforcement? Why did you care about that?
Well, from my stories of success, I was at a point in my life that I had to make some decisions, and I was really interested in law, but I knew what it would take to get me there, and I had started my LSATs and identifying colleges or law schools that I was really interested in. And, right before that, I did recognize that might be a problem because I had two parents diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
And so, I had to say to myself, although my father said, hey, look, you got to finish this school thing out and you do all these things. But, just being a realist here, I had to make some decisions. So I decided that I would, my plan B was law enforcement. And so my plan B worked. Not to say that plan A wouldn't have, but I think plan B was really a good choice.
You worked your way up in the DEA.
Yeah.
You retired as special agent in charge for the Washington, D.C. metro area. That's pretty. That's not easy to do. That's pretty impressive.
Right, and it took a lot of hard work, a lot of listening, understanding. Help from others, and just being myself in getting there. So
having an incredibly supportive wife with you moving and the kind of job that was.
Exactly, and children that are just great, So my wife, we met. And we were married in Philadelphia, and that was a time when I was really starting to establish myself as a senior agent on the job. Really, it could have been a time when I said, well, you know what, I haven't reached that pinnacle of where I really want to be, and I'm not ready for this type of relationship. But I think it balanced my life out. It made me sort of pay attention to the little things in life and the big things in life, and so that was a great thing. And then having children is a whole different, adds another element to that, because now you really pay attention to detail. You don't take as many risks because you want to make sure that you come home every night, and that you're safe every day. And so
So
for
yeah,
me,
let's
yeah,
tell me more about that.
yeah,
Being a in law enforcement and being
right,
a father and a husband and being a
right.
family man and balancing those two, the stress of
Well,
that.
and that's what we talked about earlier, and all those things can bring on anxiety, and stress, because you're dealing with your caseload at work. That caseload could be working undercover in a very violent situation, managing your caseload, um, trial, because you have to prepare all of these reports, and you might be a team leader on a case, and everybody's depending on you at work, and then of course your family's depending on you at home, and just take it a little further, and if your spouse works, woo,
Yeah, there's a lot
that,
there.
and you have children. We were, commuting and doing all those things. The kids had to go to daycare, they had to do a number of things, and there was a time when, because we were eventually assigned to the Virgin Islands, and my oldest son was in school. My wife was. We were expecting the second, and we didn't. We thought it would be best for her to have our second back stateside.
Sure.
So I was actually playing Mr. Mom and working in St. Croix, because I took care of my son. I had to make sure that he got to the to school in the morning. We had a good support base in a family that we met there, and our sons went to the same school. So I would drop him off in the morning. They would pick him up, and after work, I would pick him up and take him home. And so it was,
And it's not like you're working at you're in the DEA, so you're
yeah,
going and being one guy,
right,
all day long at work.
yeah,
Whatever it takes to be who you needed to be in the
right,
drug enforcement agency,
right,
and then you had to go home and be dad.
right, yeah. So and you can see, if you're not really tough in terms of physically and mentally tough, uh, these things can really get to you, and that's your point about, the stressors, and you mentioned the black thing and the white thing. Well,
Well, so I wasn't recording that, and what I was saying was the
yeah,
reason for the podcast was
yeah,
because of just the stressors on people,
stress,
and
right,
that white
yeah.
men seem to commit suicide exponentially more than black men.
Well, and that could be the case in law enforcement as well. But because I think, you know, and I could use myself as an example. Uh, Growing up, I was always told that I had to work twice as hard,
Mm-hmm.
because I was a black man, or I would be a black man. And just like you hear everybody talking about the talk. Okay. Well, my parents gave me the talk, and they also told me that I had to work twice as hard. Okay. So
So, can you just
when,
for people who don't know what the talk is? Can you just say what the talk is?
well, the talk is how you react to law enforcement. And say, if you're stopped in an automobile, if you even go to the grocery store or the mall, hey, if you're not going to buy it, don't touch it. Okay, and how you respond to police officers. You have to be calm. Your hands are on the steering wheel, respectfully, and your responses, and all these things are taught to, in most cases, to black young men. And now we even have to go further to talk to our daughters about this.
So how do you have that? So now, so you're a black man in law enforcement,
Right,
uh, and we won't even maybe not even get into what it took for you to rise through the ranks the way you did.
right,
But now you have to talk with your sons and
mm-hmm.
your daughters. What?
Right.
How did you have that talk wearing a badge and still have that talk?
Well, I had the talk with them, my sons, and they actually, because their fathers in law enforcement, they really never had a a problem in looking a law enforcement officer in the eye, and
That's a double-edged sword, though.
yeah, yeah, but my one of my sons happened uh, to be a witness at an accident, a car accident, and he was approached by an officer, and the officer asked him a question. Did you see this? And he said, he looks at him, yes, and he speaks. And for some reason, that officer, not even knowing, sort of said, is someone in your family law enforcement?
Hmm.
Because of the way he responded. He wasn't running away. He was direct. He spoke to the officer. He said, "Hey, this is what I saw," and something triggered this officer to ask him, you know, is your dad or mom a cop or something? And he says, yeah, my dad is in law enforcement. And I have my oldest decided he would get into law enforcement. My middle son, he's a football coach at a college and university, and then my daughter's still in college, and so they've all been taught to respect the badge, okay, and not be fearful of it. Okay, and
But you still had the talk of
but I
being
still had to
smart.
talk. This be smart, and where you go, what happens, and my daughter's even experienced it, recently. So now it's not just our sons that we have to talk to; it's our daughters as well.
So since we're talking, I didn't record what we were talking about earlier, and walking
Mm.
that line. Again, you being in law enforcement and you having children, and I said I have friends who are police officers, and I think about the stress that they're under,
Mm-hmm.
and what it takes for them to go to work, do their job, try and come home, raise a family, and then being absolutely sympathetic and horrified with what I see with Black Lives Matter and with the way the way culture has gone. Uh, help us understand to have compassion for both, right? Because when we first started talking, I wasn't recording, and you spoke about the stress and the pressure of being a law enforcement officer, and then the substance abuse, and then the domestic violence because you were in internal affairs and how to deal with that. Can you talk a little bit about what police officers go through?
Well, one, I would say, hey, um, you can't really paint a broad brush on this whole issue, but there's responsibility. Um, when you have situations that we just witnessed on, that's a tough pill to swallow for those officers who spend a lot of time working in communities
Mm.
and working to establish a relationship within communities. And so when you have something that happens like that, it just sets everything back. Like uh, it sends us back decades. Okay. And where officers are trying to seek that trust, and then you have a few who basically destroy that trust. And for something to happen to anybody like that, it's wrong.
Mm.
And we all pay the price for that wrong. And so
Everybody, what you're saying is everybody, the people in law enforcement, the people who are the victims, everybody
right,
paid the price
everybody,
because now we can't get too rational.
right, and now we can't, and we have to say, and at the end of the day, that lives matter. Okay. And we can't be afraid to say that. And so time and time again, and I've been in so many discussions about this, where everybody should have a voice, in my opinion, but that voice should all be going back to that one same thing, that all people should have their dignity and respect. And when you cross that line, it's wrong. And we all have to be in this mode where we're all saying that.
Mm.
Okay. No matter if you're a cop and you have to deal with this ill of within the ranks, it doesn't matter. This is wrong. Okay. So when you're violating someone's rights, their dignity and their respect, it can't happen.
Mm.
And so when I look at these things, and we talk about systemic issues, it all goes back to what's done on the job. Okay, because if this goes on, a disparate treatment for people of color on the job, how can you go out into the world and just change overnight?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the system. The system has to take care of itself behind the walls and in front of the walls.
Sure.
And so that's where you have all these pressures and being complicit, because hey, if you say something, I might not get that promotion. I might not get those stripes if I say something. Okay. And if I want to be a part of that network, okay, or that buddy system, or that good old boy network, then I have to be complicit to what they do. And there comes a point in time when you have to realize that you're here to serve the public, and that comes first. And
You know,
so,
what a double bind that is. If you are
right,
for you to be in,
right,
if you are a good person and you see something bad, but the consequences of you doing that, you know, we see that in the political process, we see that in high school, we see that everywhere.
right,
We want
everywhere.
to be part of our pack.
Right. And then you take, and I'll say this, you take women, right? Now, um, because of this male dominant profession, they now have to appear that they're just as strong as a guy. Okay,
Mm.
they also may have families. They may have children,
So they have to go
and
to work and be men, and then come home
men,
and be mom.
right? You know, and so think of that pressure,
Oh my gosh.
and then just think about how they move up and down the ranks.
Mm.
Well, really up the ranks. It's probably just as hard, even more hard.
Yeah, I can't imagine the internal fortitude to choose that life.
Right. So but people, um, men and women come on the job, and I would like to think that they come on this job to serve the public, and they take an oath to do so. And so, with that, that's what we have to constantly remind each other in law enforcement: what you pledge to do.
Hmm.
And if we do that, and you one thing, and I told an administrator once, before, I said, you know what, there's some things that you can predict, but you can't predict misconduct. You don't know when somebody's going to go out there and do something
Mm.
crazy. You know it can happen, but you can't tell me it's going to happen today. And so and he turns to me and says, you know what, you got a point about that.
Mm.
And it's just, you don't know when somebody's going to go out and do something crazy. But you do know that there's elements to this that can trigger all these things into happening, and prevent people from stepping up. You have one guy with his knee on someone's neck, and then you have three or four others sitting there watching. We don't have to have this conversation. We don't have to have this conversation. Well, we can't discuss this, or we're too political where we can't say that that's wrong.
Mm.
I mean, you know what? Let's not cloud the issue here. That is wrong.
That is wrong, and standing by it is wrong.
Yeah, and I don't care what organization or whatever, if you can't come to the conclusion and make the statement that that's wrong, unless you're some,
Well, see, now the pushback I've gotten
right,
is that great. We all agree that was wrong with George Floyd.
right,
We all agree that was wrong.
okay,
Then when we make it a broader systemic issue, now that's where the arguments come in, right? With the protests and with all that stuff. And that's where the separation came from the people who
right.
all looked at that video and said, that was wrong. That needs to be handled. Then when we said, actually, this happens more than you think. And
Yeah,
really
exactly.
That's where the vitriol came. And it's really an interest. It's just an interesting phenomenon.
And you have to look at the economics of it. Some of these things happen, and if you're uh, in a certain, I would say, economic background, so to speak, if you can't afford legal representation, you just take a charge,
Yeah.
and that charge,
I was listening to one story where
and
where a guy who was being pulled over, and he drove all the way to his grandmother's house so he could be pulled over in his grandmother's driveway, laid himself down in the grass in his grandmother's driveway so there would be witnesses and he would feel like he was safe.
right,
But then I read the story after that was he's now arrested for resisting arrest. He now has a felony, right? And now he can't get a job. So now,
right,
because it was a traffic incident, he was afraid for his life. He now has a felony,
Yeah,
and his whole life is
it's
lived
gone.
out of that from that.
Yeah,
And that's where the systemic problem here just
right.
becomes unwieldy. And you have a whole class of people who can't get fit, can't get ahead, can't get out of whatever it is that, was holding them back.
So now, what happens to the guy that's walking on the street? Okay, you take that. That example was someone in a car.
Mm-hmm.
Just someone walking on the street. What are they going to do? Run now?
Yeah.
Okay. And so now.
And by the way, that happened to me. I told you the story before. This thing is, I was in a suit and I was told to stop, and the people who told me didn't show me a badge, scared me. I started walking faster away. They tackled me, started screaming at me, handcuffed me, threw me in the dirt. Right, in a suit. That happened to me because I got scared with 4 men chasing me, not knowing who they were.
But if you and you look at this now, you could just, and I'm not going to assume this, but because anybody could wear a suit,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But if you look at it, chances are that you probably could seek legal assistance and seek recourse.
10 years later, and it just occurred to me now. Like, I was so freaked out and scared and wanted to be out of that situation that I didn't think to take badge numbers. I didn't think to, and I thought, and now I think if I took badge numbers, what would they have actually done?
Yeah.
Because to me, what would they have, I really thought, I'm so glad I didn't do that, because that could have ended up a whole hell of a lot worse.
Right.
Because their conduct was, they would get in trouble for that. You know? And so they would cover that shit up.
So what happens in that example, even though you're a white male, they got away with it. Okay? So now if they could get away with that with you, they could get away with that. It just so happens that you have to be able to defend yourself legally as well. Yeah. And if you have no resources to do that, if you are singled out, that's a problem as well. And so even in your case, you were mistreated, your rights were violated. Okay. And, somebody's going to say, or you could even say that, well, no big deal. It happened to me.
Oh, I know it. It's funny. I had put it out of my mind for 12 years.
Right.
And when this started coming up, I didn't have the visceral reaction until 12 years later, and I was
Right.
having trouble breathing, going, holy shit, how helpless was I in that moment? And it just, the compassion that I have for someone who doesn't drive a Lexus,
Right.
who doesn't have lawyers, who doesn't, like, holy shit.
Yeah, and then the last thing, and I think is really important is, you know, we're we're not trying to say or um, put a guilt trip on anybody.
That's where I was
Okay.
hoping you're ending up, because I really,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is an all of us situation.
Right. This isn't a guilt trip. This is recognition of what happens on you know in the lives of people of color.
Hmm.
Okay, and it's happened for ages, so to speak, and then on top of that, we know that there have been uh, some similarities to other ethnic backgrounds. Okay, and I don't think it's fair to put everybody in the same category.
Sure.
Okay, so that it could ease your mind that, well, others have been treated misfairly, unfairly, or mistreated, and now well, you're not the only one.
It's
So
it's I have, so I'm Jewish,
and
so I have no ancestors. Right?
right.
Like my
well
ancestors not only were
well
not, they're
yeah,
gone, right? Nobody talks about
yeah.
it. But I actually,
See,
that doesn't even come up for me in these
right, but
conversations.
at the end of the day, we all need to understand that that's happened to other people of color or other ethnic backgrounds. You know, and it's funny we're talking about this because I also was selected by the administrator of the DEA to chair co-chair initially, and then I later became the chair of DEA's diversity committee. So that was the diversity committee for the
One
entire
could feel
agency.
really inadequate around you, by the way, because you are
Well,
just so,
but
you are so accomplished and have
well,
impacted so many things. I'm really just blown
well,
away.
and I have to mention this because this was a collateral assignment. I didn't get any extra money for doing it. I may have, it might have contributed to a bonus at the end of the year or whatever, but I had plenty of things to do, and I could have, like, I don't need to do this, but I thought it was important that I serve on
Mm,
that committee. One, because it was a diversity committee for the agency. Okay. And it was for inclusion by all employees, even managers. And we even implemented different tools in ratings for diversity, for senior managers, mid managers, and employees, part of their performance ratings. And so that was really good, and to really focus on those things, diversity in the workplace, not just for people of color, but women, all ethnic backgrounds, our veterans who are on the job, LGBT, individuals, and just ensuring that there was understanding that our workplace, and not just special agents and diversion investigators, recognized that we had to be the face of this country. Okay. And so in doing that, I still had my division that I had to run, 3 states and the district. And I had to go back to my office, and I couldn't change. Okay. I had to apply all those same
Right.
elements that I was telling this whole agency to do. I had to do it at home.
Mm.
And so that was important to me, and really that helped me as a manager, understanding that, hey, one, I wanted the best team. Okay. I wanted the best team of people that, they could even be smarter than I was, but I wanted to have the best team. So I got the best team in there, and it didn't matter who they were, what color whether they were male or female. As a matter of fact, I had more female managers in my division than any other special agent in charge in the enterprise during my 4 years.
Mm.
And I can name them all, and they were good.
Mm.
Okay. And so the thing is, I wanted my division to represent this country. All right. I wanted diversity in my entire division. And we worked on it, and I was pretty successful in doing so. And I even received criticism from people who said I spoke too much about diversity. But I felt, if you're gonna talk the talk, you got to walk it.
Sure.
And so I would like to think that my legacy was, in being fair, inclusive, and really practicing what I preached.
It sounds like you made a huge impact on the organization.
Now,
Definitely.
and if you take it, if you take that in itself, and you implant that into to any business or corporation or anything, your system looks different. Okay. If you take that process into a Fortune 500 company, you now have a different look. Your company should represent this country.
Mm.
Right. And that's the same for law enforcement. And you need the training. You need
Law enforcement, corporations, Congress, the Senate.
everything, and training applies as well. You know what? If I didn't have citizens academies, where citizens we taught citizens about, and business leaders and community leaders about DEA and what we did. And you know what came out of that? We had people from the entire community. I even had people from the Anti-Defamation League. Okay. And they in turn invited me to a senior management training that they held for senior leaders. And man, I got so much out of that, because we learned about all sorts of hate crimes. and all groups who are involved in hate crimes. That was probably one of the best trainings I ever had. So this is what we really, as a police officer, what happens when you have to go into the Asian community? People respond to you differently. If you don't have the training, you wouldn't understand that. They're not, if they're really into their culture and culturally attuned, someone with an Asian background is not going to look at you in your face and look at you in your eye, because it's a form of disrespect. So you can't go into that community and say, hey, look at me. You're disrespecting me. Look at me. No. So you have to understand these things. And this also applies in the workplace. What you say to people, what you might think is not offensive, it could be offensive to somebody. And so just all of those things that when you're talking about inclusion and understanding and hey, even in our religious organizations, people have their own opinions about this in religion. So hey, this is a learning process, but now you see all ethnic groups standing up together. There has been the rioting, maybe the looting that people are concerned about. But if you look at and you listen to the response and the message from the families who are victims, their message is, don't do that kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Always.
Okay. And so now you probably have people who don't understand that message that are going out. You have people from outside going in.
There's there's so much more of that than anybody would want to admit.
Anything, but when you hear a family member of someone who was murdered like that, and they say to you, hey, we want to see the justice system at work, but we don't want you to go out and tear down this city. That's huge. That sends a huge message. And so that is what we should be focusing on.
Doesn't sell newspapers.
Right.
All right. Doesn't get clicks.
Yeah.
So
here's a family that's hurting. They could have very easily, ignited this whole situation, but they didn't.
Right.
And those who chose to vandalize and loot, they were told by this family, that's not the way to do it here. I think that's the message here.
I would agree. I would love it if more people in authority and in positions of leadership took that same cue from those families and said, you know
Right.
what, these people are also hurting. Let's not start a war. But
Right.
like, so if we could switch gears, there's one more part, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there's one more subject I just want to tease out with you a little bit, because your dedication to the opioid crisis and your dedication to drug addiction in all of these different communities, for me, is
Mm-hmm.
breathtaking. And the problem is so pervasive in
Mm-hmm.
every community at every economic level. Um, one is why is the opioid crisis and the drug addiction such an important thing for you that you spend so much time in it?
Well, just throughout my career, if you look back to the '80s, I was engaged heavily in the crack cocaine situation. I saw how the laws were changed to in terms of conviction. Okay, and if someone had 26 grams, that was a major case, and minimum mandatory sentences for that amount of crack cocaine. But you could use anything else,
Mm,
and so I I played a role in that because I had some of those cases. Some of those cases where, of course, some of the conspirators really were afraid to testify or become government witnesses because they feared for their lives.
sure.
So, well, if you don't cooperate, you're going down too. And I saw that, but we've always had this a heroin problem in the inner cities. We've had drug problems in the inner cities. I've had family members who had issues with substance use, and when you really look at it, we finally in law enforcement admitted to one thing, and that was we can't arrest our way out of this problem.
Mm,
And when we began to say that and understand it, now you had police chiefs and sheriffs sitting at town hall meetings next to someone with a substance use disorder. You had law enforcement sitting next to doctors, pharmacists, trying to understand this pervasive problem. Okay, and so when we actually and most chiefs and sheriffs began to say that, and in the drug enforcement, we're a single mission agency, but at the same time, we were told to engage in the community.
mm,
And so, working with our partners, working with those in the medical spaces, and understanding that doctors, when they go through their education process, they weren't trained in overprescribing. Okay, that having the dialogue with distributors and manufacturers. Now, DEA is doing more of that, where they didn't do that in the past, and so establishing relationships with your state and local partners, and so what I found is we were in communities. And so one of the things I decided I would do was go even further into the faith-based communities. And so with that, when you take a look at religion and faith-based organizations, hey, the first place most people are going to go to when they have a problem, they're going to go to the priest for spiritual healing. Okay, so the parents of somebody who's recovering, they're going to go to the priest. The grandparents, the brothers, the sisters. Okay, even those who are suffering may even go.
Mm.
But what we found is because someone's suffering from substance use, it's hard for them to get that spiritual healing because they feel like they committed the cardinal sin. So now we have to work with these faith-based organizations to say, look, you're actually a first responder.
Mm. Yeah.
Because you're going to be the first place that they go to. They're not going to come to me in law enforcement. They don't trust me yet.
Right.
Right? Okay. We're saying all the good things. We're saying we're not going to arrest the victims, and these people are victims. Okay. But the church is primed for this. And so when we if we train up our spiritual leaders on the various resources, who they can connect to in communities, you can only do so much counseling as a priest or a minister. And at some point in time, you're going to have to refer. And then we have some churches that are doing really good stuff. Okay, but not all of them. Some churches say, "Hey, we can't do anything because we're too small." Well, team up with another church. You know what? This has no economic boundary. It has no racial and spiritual influence here. You can team up with, if you're a Catholic church, you can team up with the Episcopal church. You can team up with the Methodist church. You can do all these things because race has
there's enough 12-step programs going on in all their
right.
basements anyway.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? You're already doing some of those things, but now, you know what? How do you get those people in the pews? Okay. And so that if you participate in all these things, you know your resources, there's a good chance that you could get them in the pews as well.
It's a recruitment tactic.
Yeah, well, it's not that, because it's you know what? At the end of the day, you know what? You don't have to come to my church. Just get to some spiritual place.
Agreed. And I will say that, being 30 years recovered myself, everybody that I meet who finds recovery does almost find some spiritual thread, which is really because we've been to hell,
Right?
And we don't want to go back.
Yeah, so my thing was, hey, let me do something different. But that was hard because you can't really engage in religion in the federal government.
So now that you're a consultant, now that you have your own business, now you can do whatever you want to do.
Well, this is funny because when my last year at DEA, I actually confronted one of the Episcopal bishops in Virginia, and I asked him. I said, "Well, what is the church doing about this substance use disorder?" Right? Knowing I couldn't really get involved in this thing and just show preferential treatment to the Episcopal Church. Well, what happens is Bishop really began to think about what I said. And so, how the Episcopal Church is broken down is broken down into provinces. So, this bishop called the one of the bishops that was in charge of Province 3 of the Episcopal Church. Now, that's Delaware, Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia, and the district. Okay, so you probably have 6 states there, right? So they called me and they said, "Hey, can you give us some training on this opioid problem?" Okay, so my division council was like, we can't remember, we can't do this religion thing, And I said, well, you know what? This is a community based group that's asking me for training. So what I did was, because Pennsylvania and Delaware wasn't part of my division, I called the special agent in charge of the Philadelphia office, and I had him send a team along with my team to give these bishops a DEA 101, and then 2, how we get to this point, what this opioid crisis really looks like, and then from a global, regional, and national perspective, and then I brought my entire staff in, and we gave them this training.
So what's in the training?
Well, the training is what's DEA? Okay, so we explained to them what we do as an agency. Okay, 2, what we're doing in communities. 3,
which is what? So what do you? So what I'm trying to get is, so for the people who are listening, like, so what is available to people who are either family members or community members or themselves?
Well, DEA started what is called a 3-prong initiative. Okay. In terms of community engagement, it's law enforcement, diversion, and community outreach. Okay. And so it's really, it was called a DEA 360 initiative. Okay. And so with that community piece really involves training. So there's training programs that DEA has available for school systems, school curriculum for students, parents, and teachers. And there's other networks.
So what do you actually tell the priest?
So we tell the priest, hey, look, this is what we do as an agency. Okay. We're responsible for enforcing the drug laws of the United States.
But how does that help them? How does that help the priest?
But you have to let me finish here, and because 1, they get to understand what we do. Okay. Then they get to understand, we talk about the drug problem in this country. Okay. And they get an understanding of the roots of traffic, how these drugs get into this country, and for example, methamphetamine. You could produce that with chemicals here in the country, but
why I can't buy Sudafed without a license.
Yeah, right. But the cartels now make these mega labs. Who's doing that stuff in their backyard anymore? No, it's coming from across the border. And how these what the internet how the internet plays in this thing with children. Okay, going on the internet, buying these drugs from China and these chemicals. Okay, and so designer drugs, Scooby snacks and all these drugs, synthetic cannabinoids, and giving them an understanding of what they are, and then how we got to this point. Okay, they need to have this understanding of how we got to this opioid crisis. Okay, whether it's overprescribing for pain, and all these things, and then what the agency's doing in the community to provide outreach, how we work with our state and local counterparts. This is an education for them, and they get this, and then we end in telling them that, you know what, you're first responders. This is why you're so important as clergy, because people are going to come to you with their problem, and you need to have a solution. You can't just counsel your way out of this problem.
Sure. So what's the solution that
the solution is identifying resources in your community, understanding what those resources are, who to refer individuals to, right? Knowing that you can't solve this problem, but you can help the individual. All right. And just all those things that they, if your church doesn't have an AA program, start one. If your churches aren't engaged in this, start an outreach program and get to know all your organizations in your communities that and coalitions that are involved in substance use disorder prevention. There's so much. How do you have the resources for families, not just for the individual that's suffering, but their family, because the families are suffering too. So this is what we talk about. This is, and from that, Province 3 of the Episcopal Church started a task force, and they asked if I would serve as the co-chair. So I serve as the co-chair of the Province 3 opioid or substance use task force with a number of clergy, parishioners in Province 3. And that has even gone further, because now Bishop Curry decided that he wanted a national task force. And so there's a national task force in the Episcopal Church.
So are there research? So are there where will people start? Like if they listen to this, is there a website where they can just start to pull the thread to find out what resources that they have?
Well, it has to go even further, because I was just referring to one denomination. So my next step is to move it out into other denominations. Okay, just having this evidence base to say, okay, this is what's happening in this one denomination. Let's go, let's move it. And so I have my last contract was with the Dania Institute, and I serve as a subject matter expert for the Dania Institute, which provides services for thousands of people who are in recovery and mental health, have mental health issues, and they put on training for communities and other organizations. So I started that about a month ago.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. So
So if they go to the DEA website,
right.
are there resources on the DEA website?
Resources under community outreach and resources. You'll see the various programs that they have,
Okay.
the coalitions that they work with, like CADCA, Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, SAMHSA, and just think twice, and a
Awesome.
number of organizations that they work in conjunction with.
So I'll put those links in the show notes so people can go find that.
Right.
Because I want people to have actionable, something they can go do if they get.
Yeah.
If listening to you, it's so compelling to be able to go and actually do something.
And they have that program, Operation Prevention. And Operation Prevention is that school program for students. It's a curriculum, and also it's branched into the college platform. So yeah, so that's good. And it's funny, and this may seem strange, but the Church of Scientology, they have a wonderful program with resources, and their resources are on all drugs, and it's even printed in Spanish. And so a number of police departments, like the New York Police Department, have adopted their resources as well. I mean, if you have to go where those resources are,
right?
And for a long time, you look at it, we were servicing one community, and that was whoever spoke English. And now if you can get resources that are in Spanish for the Latino community, I mean that's great. And even going as far as our Native American communities, just because even on the reservations they need these resources.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Right. So hey.
Karl, thank you. I've got 3 shows worth of material here. There was so much substance in what you brought in every area. I really appreciate you coming on and spending so much time to educate and to inform us. I really do appreciate that. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Well, all they have to do, I have my website. It's www.colderalliedconsultingllc. And my email address is kc.colderalliedllc@consultant.
That'll all be in the show notes. Plus your profile and success.
It's profile and success. You got me there, and everything is listed there.
Okay, so I will make it very easy for you to find Karl. Again, right. Karl, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
And even you in your recovery, anytime you need me, you can call me and we can go out and do something together.
Thank you. You and I, this isn't the last conversation you and I are going to have. To everybody else, just appreciate you, whether you're listening to the first part or the second part of this conversation. I appreciate you always being willing to have the tough conversations with us. Take care of yourself. I love you. Have a great rest of the day.